Hey guys, it's Rachel here, and today I'm going to be doing another comparison video. This time I will be comparing donuts. So more specifically, I will be comparing Gordon Ramsay's chocolate malt donuts with Martha Stewart's vanilla cream filled donuts. We're gonna just dive in and start right off with making the dough for both of these recipes. As for Gordon Ramsay's recipe for the malted chocolate donuts, we are going to use active dry yeast or fresh yeast in order to make his donuts. Basically, all you have to do is melt together your sugar and milk over some high heat, then make sure that it's within a reasonable temperature range so that you can activate your yeast. This is about 105 degrees Fahrenheit to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your yeast. And you're just gonna go ahead and whisk the yeast and the milk together and let it bloom. Set that aside and take the other half of the milk that you reserved and melt in some butter. Then in a separate bowl, we're gonna go ahead and combine a lot of our dry ingredients. So this includes our flour, sugar, and salt. And then we'll go ahead and add in our eggs, our yeast mixture, and the melted butter and milk mixture into it. And then it's pretty simple. All you have to do is mix that together until a dough starts to form. Now that our dough has started to come together, we're gonna go ahead and knead it a little bit with our hands. I found that using a lot of flour was really helpful during this process because the dough was pretty sticky, so just flouring it out helps a lot. And then we'll go ahead and place it into a floured bowl, cover it with some plastic wrap, and let it rise for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Martha Stewart's donut dough actually takes a lot more time in order to prepare, and you have to start this process either 6 to 15 hours in advance. In order to make her dough, it actually comes together really easily. All you have to do is use a stand mixer with a dough attachment and go ahead and mix together your milk and your yeast. Let that stand and start to bubble and activate a little bit, and then you'll go ahead and add in your other ingredients, including your eggs, your milk, your sugar, and blend those ingredients together. Once the dough has started to come together, you'll go ahead and add in your room temperature butter, 1 tablespoon at a time. So making sure to add it in gradually and making sure that each clump of butter is fully incorporated before you add the next. This process will take a while. It took me around 5 to 10 minutes in order to get all that butter incorporated. Then basically all you have to do is remove the dough from the bowl and then cover it with plastic wrap and let it sit in the fridge for about 6 to 15 hours. So after about 2 hours of letting Gordon Ramsay's recipe proof and letting that dough rise, I saw a significant difference. You can just see how it pushes against that plastic wrap. So then basically all you have to do is go ahead and unwrap it, punch the dough down a little bit, which is sad because you spent all that time letting it rise, but don't worry, it'll be back. And then go ahead and place it onto a floured surface and roll it out. You'll roll out your dough with a floured rolling pin to a thickness of about 3/4 of an inch, and basically all you have to do is shape it into a 9x6 inch rectangle. Then you'll go ahead and cut them into about 12 rectangular pillows. You can kind of think of these donuts as beignets almost. Then go ahead and place these rectangles onto a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, and we're gonna go ahead and let that rise again for an additional 30 minutes in the oven. And as for the Martha Stewart recipe, once the dough has risen for at least 15 hours, you go ahead and take them out of the fridge and roll it out onto a floured surface. You'll do a really similar process in which you just roll out the dough until you get about a 12-inch square that's 1/2 an inch thick. Then you'll use about a 3.5-inch round cookie cutter or biscuit cutter, whatever you have, and punch out approximately 9 donuts. Then go ahead and transfer these circular donuts onto a baking sheet. Do not line this baking sheet with parchment paper, which is what I did. She says to flour the baking sheet and then put your donuts on top of that. Would highly recommend that. I thought that the baking sheet could cut it. It does not, because the dough really sticks to that baking sheet. So you'll want to have a lot of flour instead of parchment paper. Then you'll have to do the same thing and let it do its second rise so we can get pillowy, puffy donuts. And so you'll leave that in the oven to proof for about 2 to 3 hours. So in the meantime, while the dough was rising, I went ahead and prepared the filling for both of these donuts. For Gordon Ramsay's recipe, we're going to use a chocolate-based filling, and for Martha Stewart's recipe, we're going to use a vanilla pastry cream filling. This part was pretty simple for Gordon Ramsay's recipe. All you had to do was heat up some heavy cream as well as honey and melt that together, and then pour it over your chocolate and butter and stir that together until you get a ganache. I don't know what was going on with my ganache, but I thought it would set as it got colder, but it was really runny the entire time. So this was really difficult towards the end when I was trying to stuff all of my donuts with this chocolate filling. It was kind of a disaster, as you guys will soon see. On the other hand, for Martha Stewart's pastry cream filling, it's pretty simple. You just make a vanilla pastry cream and then whip up 6 tablespoons of heavy cream and fold those ingredients together. So I think this kind of lightens up the heaviness of the pastry cream when you add a little bit of that heavy whipping cream. The texture and consistency of this filling was great. It was fantastic. I had no issues with it, and it also tasted quite amazing because I used a little bit of vanilla bean in there. All right, so now comes the scary part, which is deep frying these donuts. I've never really personally deep fried anything in my life, so I was not great at this. I was definitely a noob, and I learned trial by error, but I figured it out eventually. So basically, I heated up about 3 inches worth of vegetable oil in a saucepan over my stove, and I waited until it reached about 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty terrifying. So just be careful when you're dealing with all of this, because you don't want to burn yourself, you don't want to splash oil anywhere. It's pretty gross. And also make sure you turn on your fan, because otherwise your house is going to smell like burnt fried food for the rest of the day, which, you know, some people may actually enjoy. Pretty simple. Once the dough has poofed up, you'll just throw in your donuts and rotate them until they're nice and golden brown on both sides. So basically you'll do this for both recipes, just fry them until they're a nice golden brown. Some of them I over-fried, some of them I under-fried, so it kind of depends. And then once you're done with that, just pop them onto a tray with some paper towels just to soak up and absorb all of that excess oil that you don't really want there. And you'll notice here that when I tried to plop Martha Stewart's donuts into the oil, it was really a struggle because the donuts were sticking to that parchment paper that I placed on the baking sheet, so they were really misshapen once they went into the fryer. So they were supposed to be these nice, beautiful circles, but instead they ended up as these oblong shapes or just weird, misshapen figures. So that's kind of where that went wrong. But they still tasted great, so, you know, no issues there, I suppose. Now comes the fun part where we get to dust and sugar these donuts. So for Gordon Ramsay's recipe, he actually asks for Ovaltine or a malt powder, and I didn't actually have malt powder, so I went ahead and just used cocoa powder, which in retrospect didn't work quite as well since it was a little bit finer and it kind of absorbed into each of the donut pillows. So I wouldn't recommend that, but basically it's just a combination of cocoa powder or malt powder as well as sugar. And you'll just coat each of your donuts and toss it liberally in this sort of seasoning of sorts, I guess you could say. For Martha Stewart's recipe, very simple, just a cup of sugar and just toss your donuts in that, and it'll create a nice sparkly finish on each of your donuts. All right, now comes the filling part, which is what I really struggled with, especially for Gordon Ramsay's recipe. So my chocolate ganache or my chocolate filling just didn't really set. I don't know why. It was still pretty runny, but I thought, you know, as it cooled down it would change, but that was not the case for me. So trying to insert this chocolate ganache into each of these donuts was such a struggle, and it was kind of like exploding everywhere, getting really messy, and it also just wouldn't go in very far. Like, I did take a knife to just kind of insert and give it a little bit of leeway, and so I could just take that pastry tip and sort of stick it in there, but guys, it just did not work. I don't know what was going on. It just would not. It would refuse to go in and fill any of my donuts. So it was a really big struggle, and I wouldn't really recommend this ganache filling to anyone who's trying it, or maybe I just did something wrong with my ganache and it just didn't cooperate the way that I wanted it to. As for Martha Stewart's vanilla pastry cream filling, that worked a lot more successfully. The pastry cream was delicious. I could just eat it by itself, so adding it into each donut was even a bigger bonus. Although I wish that the shape of the donut was a little bit nicer. And now that our donuts have been made, we are going to focus on perhaps the most important part, which is the review and taste test. So here I have both Gordon Ramsay's chocolate malted donuts as well as Martha Stewart's vanilla cream donuts. I can smell the fried dough and it smells delicious, and I cannot wait to dig in. But first we gotta start with appearance and aesthetics. So based off of appearance alone, here is Gordon Ramsay's chocolate malted donuts. And like I mentioned, I used cocoa powder instead of Ovaltine, so these guys are a little bit more brown than usual. My dad actually thought they were burnt, which is not the case. They weren't burnt, they just were a little bit more brown. But I did definitely enjoy making the dough. It was very simple to make, as well as just handling the dough was easier. It wasn't very sticky and it worked well with parchment paper. On the other hand, we have Martha Stewart's vanilla cream donuts here that are supposed to be circular but just look a little bit bumpy and rough around the edges. However, they do have a nice kind of sparkly sugar glaze on top, and they have a nice little peep of the pastry cream right there. I will say that working with this dough was much trickier because I had to wait 15 hours to let it rise, and also it stuck a lot to that parchment paper that I had rested them on. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the taste test. I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off with Gordon Ramsay's chocolate donuts. I was really excited for Gordon Ramsay's chocolate donuts because I am a big fan of chocolate and donuts, but I thought they would be a really great combination together. Unfortunately though, as you can see, I only got a little bit of filling, and that was just at the sort of entry point of the donut. So it didn't really seep through the rest of the donut, and the crumb and the texture of the donut itself was a little bit drier than I had expected. I would have preferred something softer and a little bit moister as well. So in terms of flavor, it wasn't the greatest, and I wish that filling would have seeped through a little bit more. Now I'm gonna go ahead and dig in and try Martha Stewart's vanilla pastry cream filled donuts. Yeah, this is delicious. Although these donuts are a little bit more misshapen and don't look quite as nice on the outside, the crunchiness of the sugar, the texture of the donut, as well as the delicious vanilla pastry cream in the middle, all come together for a really, really satisfying donut that is undeniably delicious. So if I had to choose a winner between these two donuts, I will say that in terms of appearance, Gordon Ramsay's donuts take it away, but in terms of taste, flavor, and pretty much everything else, I would say Martha Stewart takes the cake. So the winner here today would definitely be Martha. Good job, girl. You deserve it. These donuts are definitely worth the calories. So if you guys are at home and want to make your own donuts, just be careful when deep frying and make sure to check out Martha's recipe. Gordon's isn't bad as well, and a lot of people have said great things about it, but maybe it just wasn't the right one for me. But I really enjoyed Martha's and I highly recommend it. So I'll see you guys next time for an all new video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Bye guys!